Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep on U.S. tariff policy.
Ooh, tariffs.
Yeah, a topic that's been in the headlines and, sparking debates for centuries.
Right.
You've sent us a really interesting mix, this time articles, even a book excerpt,
Okay.
all about the history of tariffs in America.
Cool.
Excited to unpack all of this with you.
Yeah, you know what's so interesting about tariffs
What's that?
is that it's not just about numbers and economics, it's
Yeah.
about history.
Uh,
It's about politics.
right.
And even the personalities of some of these really influential figures in
Yeah.
American history.
Definitely.
So we'll be exploring the successes and failures
Okay.
of U.S. tariff policy,
Right.
and most importantly, what lessons we can take away.
I like it. Let's jump right in with a name you might not expect.
Okay.
President William McKinley,
McKinley.
the Tariff King.
Interesting.
The source material actually mentions that Donald Trump
Okay.
saw McKinley as a sort of inspiration for his own tariff policies.
Huh. So what's the connection?
Yeah, what is the connection there?
Well, McKinley presided over a period of huge economic growth
Okay.
in the late 19th century.
Hmm.
And this is at a time when the U.S. had really high tariffs.
You say high tariffs, but one of the sources points out that the U.S. didn't even have income tax back then.
Exactly.
So tariffs were really the primary source of, government revenue.
Yeah, that's a key point to remember.
Okay.
When we look at the historical context,
Yeah.
tariffs were how the government was funded.
Wow.
And McKinley believed that these protectionist policies
Right.
really helped to build American industries and trade.
Mhm.
He even enacted the McKinley Tariff Act of 1890,
Okay.
which raised import taxes by almost 50%.
Wow, 50%. That's a huge increase.
Huge.
But the sources also mentioned there's some debate among scholars about whether those tariffs were the actual cause of that economic boom
Right.
or just one factor among many.
Yeah, some experts argue that other factors, like we had a lot of immigration at the time, played a more prominent role. But those who support McKinley's approach argue that those high tariffs are what attracted immigrants
Who
who brought valuable skills and labor to the U.S.
Okay, so it's kind of a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah,
Did the tariffs attract the immigrants who then boosted the economy,
right.
or was it the other way around?
Exactly.
The source material also mentions a similar situation with Japan much later.
Uh-huh.
It seems like U.S. trade pressure on Japan's auto industry using tariffs as leverage actually pushed Japanese companies to build factories here in the U.S.
It's a perfect example of how tariffs can be a double-edged sword.
Oh, okay.
They can protect domestic industries, but they can also have these unforeseen consequences
Right.
and trigger these unexpected reactions from other countries.
Like setting up shop here in the U.S.
Exactly, which is something that people who support tariffs often point to.
as a potential benefit.
Yeah, as a benefit.
So if tariffs aren't just about protectionism,
Uh-huh.
could we say they're also a tool to influence other countries' actions? Yeah. Is that where this idea of reciprocity comes in?
Exactly.
Which the sources mention a lot.
Reciprocity has been this recurring theme in U.S. trade policy for centuries.
Yeah.
It's all about fairness and balance in trade relationships,
Mhm.
making sure that American businesses and workers aren't disadvantaged.
Right. And the sources point out that even today, figures like Robert Lighthizer, who was U.S. trade representative under President Trump,
Right.
advocate for returning to those principles of reciprocity, much like the approach during the JT era.
What's crucial to understand about the current debates about tariffs
Okay.
is that they're not just about economics.
Right.
They're intertwined with political ideologies and this shifting global landscape.
So that brings us to a really important question.
Okay.
Can tariffs work in our world today? What can we learn from history about their potential impact,
Yeah.
both positive and negative?
Right. You know, one figure who really understood both the potential and the pitfalls of tariffs was Alexander Hamilton.
No, Hamilton.
Yeah. His report on manufacturers back in 1791,
Okay.
that really laid the groundwork for a lot of the protectionist policies we've seen
Okay.
throughout U.S. history.
The sources mention that Hamilton was a big advocate for using tariffs to support young industries,
Yeah.
to help them grow.
Mm-hmm.
He believed that was crucial for the overall growth
Right.
of the American economy.
He was ahead of his time.
Yeah, it seems like he was way ahead of his time.
Hamilton had a vision
Okay.
for the U.S. economy.
Mm-hmm.
He argued that relying too much on agriculture would leave the country vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
and overly dependent on other nations for manufactured goods.
Okay.
He wanted a diverse economy
Makes sense.
with a strong manufacturing sector,
Right.
and he saw tariffs as a key tool for achieving that.
But the sources also bring up Thomas Jefferson,
Right?
who had very different views on trade.
Yeah.
He was more in favor of free trade, wasn't he?
Yeah. Jefferson represented the interests of Southern planters
Okay.
and strongly believed in free trade.
Interesting.
He saw that as the best way to ensure that American agricultural products,
Like,
cotton and tobacco, could be sold in global markets.
okay, so you've got these two different perspectives
This fundamental difference in perspective.
between Hamilton and Jefferson.
Yeah. And it's interesting how it really shaped these debates
Uh-huh.
for centuries.
Yeah, it's amazing how these early disagreements still resonate today.
Don't they?
Like, we're still grappling with the same questions about how to balance the interests of different parts of the economy.
Exactly.
And how to deal with the global marketplace.
Absolutely.
And that tension continued to play out in the 19th century.
Yeah.
One example the sources highlight is Henry Charles Carey,
Carey.
who was an influential economist
Yeah.
who advised President Lincoln.
Interesting.
Carey was a proponent of what they called the American system.
Right? Can you explain?
Yeah, what did that system entail?
So the American system was basically a set of policies that included high tariffs to protect those American industries,
Okay.
investments in infrastructure like roads and canals, and a focus on developing key industries like textiles
I got it.
and steel.
So a very protectionist approach
Very protectionist.
designed to boost American self-sufficiency
Yeah.
and economic independence.
Right.
It sounds like it was a direct challenge
It was.
to what the sources call the British system,
Exactly.
which was popular in Britain at the time.
Right.
They advocated for minimal government involvement in the economy and promoted free trade.
Yeah, free trade is the best way to go.
But Carey and others who liked the American system
Right.
argued that the U.S. needed to do its own thing
Uh-huh.
and protect its industries from foreign competition,
Especially
from more established countries.
Great Britain.
Like Great Britain, exactly.
Yeah.
So this idea of economic independence
Yeah.
seems to be a constant
It's a recurring theme for sure.
throughout the history of U.S. tariff policy.
It is. And it's important to note
Okay.
that even within the protectionist camp, there were different approaches and nuances, like Carey, for instance.
Okay.
He recognized the need to balance the interests of different regions and different sectors of the economy.
Right.
So he advocated for differential tariffs.
Interesting.
Basically using tariffs strategically
Okay.
to protect certain industries
Right.
while also promoting the export of others.
So even back then,
Right.
policymakers were dealing with the complexities of tariffs, trying to find ways to use them strategically to meet certain economic goals.
Exactly. It's all about strategy.
Were there any notable successes or failures during this period that we can learn from?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And that's where the historical context is really important.
Yeah.
For example, the period after the Civil War saw a lot of industrial growth in the U.S., which is often attributed in part to the protectionist policies of the American system. Industries like steel and textiles.
Right.
They flourished behind these tariff walls, which allowed them to grow and mature without facing that crushing competition
Right.
from European imports.
So this period is seen as a success story
Often,
for protectionism.
because it laid the foundation for America's rise
Wow.
to industrial dominance.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
But were there any instances where these protectionist policies backfired or had negative consequences?
Certainly one of the criticisms of the American system is that it contributed to regional disparities.
Oh, how so?
The South, which was mainly agricultural,
Okay.
felt disadvantaged by the high tariffs on manufactured goods.
Right.
They argued that it made prices higher,
Okay.
artificially higher, and benefited northern industrialists at their expense.
Interesting.
And this contributed to the growing tensions
Wow.
that ultimately led to the Civil War.
So while those tariffs might have helped industrial growth in the North,
Yeah.
they also made existing divisions worse
Exactly.
in the country.
Yeah, they exacerbated them.
So a key takeaway here
Yeah.
is that tariffs can have these unintended consequences and create winners and losers
Absolutely.
within the same country.
And as we move into the 20th century, this idea of strategic tariff use continues to evolve. The sources point to the growing importance of reciprocity as a central principle in U.S. trade policy.
Right.
It's not just about protecting domestic industries anymore.
Okay.
It's about using tariffs as leverage
Interesting.
to negotiate better trade deals
Right.
with other countries.
The Reciprocal Tariff Agreement Act of 1934
Yes.
seems to be a big turning point.
It was a pivotal moment
Yeah.
in this shift.
It gave the president the power to lower tariffs
Right.
as part of trade agreements.
Yeah, which represents a real departure from those more purely protectionist approaches of the past.
It seems to show a growing understanding
Yeah.
that trade can benefit everyone
Right.
and that tariffs can be used to open up markets
Exactly.
and create new opportunities for American businesses.
And this focus on reciprocity eventually becomes a core part
Yeah.
of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT.
Right, the GATT.
Yeah, which played a huge role in shaping the globalized economy we see today.
Right.
The GATT was a landmark agreement
Okay.
that tried to reduce trade barriers
Okay.
and promote free trade on a global scale. And it was based on this principle of reciprocity, making sure that countries would give each other equal access
Right.
to their markets.
But it's important to remember that this era of globalization,
Yeah.
driven by GATT and lower trade barriers, was also a time when the U.S. was dominant
Yeah.
in a lot of industries.
Yeah.
American companies were often able to compete
Right.
really well globally.
Yeah.
And free trade often aligned with those principles of reciprocity.
Uh-huh.
What happened as that dominance started to fade?
That's a key question.
Yeah.
As other countries developed their economies and became more competitive, in the latter half of the 20th century,
Okay.
the U.S. saw its share of global manufacturing decline,
Right.
and this led to job losses
Yeah.
in certain sectors
Uh-huh.
and contributed to a sense of economic anxiety,
Okay.
especially in parts of the country that depended
Yeah.
heavily on manufacturing.
Right.
And this seems to have fueled a resurgence of that protectionist sentiment, with some arguing that the current global trading system is unfair to American workers and businesses.
And we see figures like Robert Lighthizer
Right.
advocating for a more assertive approach to trade policy, one that emphasizes reciprocity
And uses tariffs as a tool.
to protect American jobs and industries.
Exactly.
They argue that the U.S. needs to be willing to use tariffs.
Strategically.
Yeah.
To level the playing field.
Okay.
And make sure American businesses aren't at a disadvantage.
But critics of this approach
Right.
warn about those potential unintended consequences, like trade wars
Yeah.
and higher prices.
For consumers.
Right. They argue that tariffs can ultimately hurt everyone,
Yeah, including.
including American businesses and consumers.
It's a complex debate.
It is.
And there are valid points on both sides.
The challenge for policymakers
Is to find that balance
Okay.
between protecting American jobs and industries and the potential costs,
Right.
risks.
of tariffs.
Yeah.
It seems like history can offer some really valuable lessons.
In figuring
Bring
it.
this out. We've seen how tariffs can be a really powerful tool to boost economic growth
Right.
and achieve specific policy goals.
Yeah.
But we've also seen how they can backfire
Right.
and lead to those unintended consequences, economic disparities,
Right.
and even political instability.
That's a good point. I think that's
Yeah.
something really important to consider
Yeah, as we go forward.
as we think about these issues today.
Absolutely.
So after this deep dive into U.S. tariff history, where do we land?
Right.
We've explored the back and forth, the economic arguments, the global impact,
Yeah.
from Hamilton's vision to, the ups and downs of American industries on the world stage.
Right.
What does all this mean for us now?
The main takeaway, I think, is that tariffs are a powerful tool.
Okay.
But like any tool, they can be used well, or they can cause damage. History shows that they can shield certain industries
Okay.
and achieve certain economic goals.
Right.
But we've also seen how they can backfire.
Yeah. Leading to higher prices for people, retaliation from other countries,
Right.
and even political instability.
One of the sources really hit on a question
Yeah.
that I think is on a lot of listeners' minds.
What's that?
Can tariffs actually work to revitalize American industries, especially as they face this wave of global competition?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And like a lot of things in economics and history,
Uh-huh.
the answer isn't simple. It depends on so many things.
Like,
Which industry we're talking about.
okay.
The global economic climate, and the goals of the U.S. government.
One big argument in favor of tariffs
Yeah,
is that they can level the playing field
right.
for American businesses.
The idea being
Yeah.
that if you put tariffs on imports
Okay.
from countries where labor's cheaper
Right.
or environmental regulations are looser, you're protecting U.S. industries
Right.
from unfair competition.
That's the idea.
Yeah, that's the theory.
But in practice,
Yeah. But things get messy.
how
Tariffs can make prices go up for consumers.
Okay.
And those higher prices might wipe out any benefit to the domestic producers the tariff was supposed to help.
And then there's always the risk.
Right. And then you have the risk of other countries retaliating with their own tariffs. And then you can get into a trade war.
Which hurts everyone.
Exactly.
One of the sources brought up a recent example.
Okay.
The tariffs that President Trump placed on goods from China.
Right.
Those tariffs actually raised prices.
Yeah.
For American shoppers and businesses.
Right.
And then China retaliated.
They did.
With its own tariffs.
Right.
On U.S. farm products.
Which really hurt American farmers.
Exactly. A perfect illustration of how quickly things can spiral.
Yeah.
And how tariffs can create a lose-lose situation.
Even with the best intentions.
So how do we avoid those pitfalls?
Right.
Is there a way to use tariffs smartly without triggering those negative consequences?
That's what policymakers are grappling with today.
Yeah.
One approach is to be more selective with tariffs, targeting only certain industries that really need protection.
Right.
Or where there's clear evidence of unfair practices.
Another point the sources made was about taking the long view.
The long view, yeah.
What might look like a win in one industry
right.
could end up hurting the economy in the long run.
Absolutely. Think about it.
Yeah.
Tariffs can disrupt supply chains.
Oh, okay.
They create uncertainty for businesses.
Yeah.
And they can undermine confidence in the whole trading system.
Right. Those long-term costs have to be weighed against those short-term benefits.
Exactly.
It sounds like finding the right balance is key.
It really is.
Tariffs aren't inherently good or bad.
Right.
They're a tool.
They're a tool.
That can be useful. But it needs to be used thoughtfully.
Yeah.
With a clear understanding of the potential benefits and risks.
Well said. And it's also important to remember that tariffs are just one tool in a much larger toolbox when it comes to economic policy.
Right.
Things like investing in education and infrastructure can be incredibly effective in making American industries more competitive and building a stronger economic future.
This has been a really eye-opening journey.
It has.
Through the world of U.S. tariff policy.
It's a fascinating topic.
It is. We've gone through the historical debates, the economic arguments for and against, and even how tariffs can impact geopolitics.
Right, the relationship between countries.
Exactly.
And as you can see, this conversation isn't over.
It's not.
As the global economy continues to change, this will be a central issue in policy discussions for years to come.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've come away with a better understanding of this complex history, the challenges and the potential opportunities that come with using tariffs
to shape the American economy.
Exactly. And we always encourage our listeners to keep exploring these topics.
Yeah.
What stood out to you from all this history?
Right.
What questions are you still thinking about?
Yeah.
These are the kinds of discussions that are so important in our world today.
Especially as it becomes more and more interconnected.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Until next time.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.